Really? You know that the video? Yes, number one.
Hello, how are you?
Good, good. How are you?
Good, we're here.
Awesome, awesome.
Mhm.
And then our other guest today, he is our special guest today. I'm really happy to have this time with him. If you haven't heard him, and this is your first time, hold on to your seat because I'm telling you, he makes history interesting, memorable, and just plain. You will get it. And so, if you haven't heard him before, if you have heard him before, you're really in for a treat. And he's Dr. Daniel Walker. He is a professor. He's a historian. He's a filmmaker. He's an incredible filmmaker. And if you haven't had a chance to see some of his work, you can Google Dr. Daniel at PBS Public Broadcast Services System, and you will find his work coming up there. He is an incredible historian of African American history. He does tours. I mean, he'll tell you the whole 9 yards. So we're so absolutely happy to have him here today. Dr. Daniel, welcome.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
We can hear you.
It's all good.
Perfect. Awesome. Okay, yes. So we're gonna jump right into this conversation. We opened it with some clips of Tulsa and Greenwood back in the time when it was called Black Wall Street. And so I don't want to. We have this amazing historian here, so I'm definitely not going to tell this story when we got this great historian here. So we'll let him share that with us. Dr. Daniel, can you tell us, because there's so many that don't know about Tulsa, they don't know about Black Wall Street. They hear about it, they hear Greenwood and all of that stuff and everything. And so can you please share with us the history and what we're celebrating during this time, what we're remembering during this time?
Yeah, well, thank you first off, Greg. Thank you for the invite. Rhonda Love, thank you for the invite. Always a pleasure to be in the house with DreamKreator in anything that y'all do. And for anybody who's tuning in and it's your first time, and you may be a person who follows me, DreamKreator, Rhonda Love, Greg Johnson, they do great stuff every time you see it. So I just want to first off, thank you for being on it, to be timely, and to be relevant. All right. So today is the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre. And just to give you a little background, first off, I want to first talk about language. For years, this was called the Tulsa Race Riot, and it was a misnomer. And what I mean by a misnomer is the fact that when someone uses the word riot, it implies that there's somehow this mutuality, that maybe there are two sides of things going on. And what we've been able to do now lately as historians is begin to have people talk about these things as what they are. One-sided race massacres, where an emboldened group of violent and vehemently violent groups of whites attack and destroy the things of the things that Black people are building. And what I mean by the things that Black people are building, in the case of Tulsa, Oklahoma, we had this movement of African Americans in the post-Civil War era into Oklahoma. Some people may know Oklahoma used to be called Indian Territory. So it was the space by which, if you know the thing called the Trail of Tears, where they forcefully removed the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, the Creek, the Seminole, and the Cherokee out of the Deep South, and then moved them to this area, which was called Indian Territory, which becomes the state of Oklahoma. And I say this because the plight and the reality of what happens in Greenwood, you cannot separate from the plight of what happens to Native peoples. And what I mean by that is the notion of, if the bar is set so low, meaning you've already brought one group of people here and treated them and brutally treated them. And now another group comes in and there's already a standard that you can maim, kill, rape, and destroy those things that are built by people of color. So I want to throw that in. So African Americans have begin to move into Tulsa, Oklahoma, also Oklahoma City, but moved into Tulsa, Oklahoma in the time period around the turn of the century. When we start getting into the early 1900s, there's a thing that we have in African American history called the Great Migration, where we start seeing African Americans moving from rural areas to more urban areas. And there had been a huge number of African Americans moving into Tulsa. The section called Greenwood, because we lived in an era of segregation. And so whether it be the South Side Chicago, whether it be Rosewood, whether it be, there would be these places where African Americans were. And in this case, we call it Black Wall Street because African Americans were creating wealth. There were Black banks, Black insurance companies, dentists, doctors, all types of other services. There was a huge thriving thoroughfare through the Black community. And that living of the American dream, and that's what I'm going to say it is, was a problem for whites. And this is the problem, you know, when African Americans follow the rules, do everything they're supposed to do. Huge numbers of these people were veterans of the Spanish-American War, World War I, and were doing what you're supposed to do. They had a higher per capita income than whites in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and a higher standard of education than whites in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And that ends up being the prescription for what is racial violence. The case specifically involves a gentleman named Dick Rowland, whose real name was Jimmy Johnson, but his name was Dick Rowland. He had been an orphan and brought into a family called the Rowlands there in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And he was a kid, 19 years old. And he's going into the Drexel Building, which is just a department store building or an office building. And the story is that he tripped going into an elevator. And the notion is that he then grabbed onto something to brace himself. And that was Sarah Page, a 17-year-old white girl. Now, just before we can talk about Tulsa and everything, you got to understand that the pretext for most lynchings in America was this notion of the violation of white womanhood. Okay, so 90% of all lynchings of Black men that happened in America from the time period, the end of the Civil War until basically the present, had been this notion of the violation of white womanhood. And you may know that there were laws that Black men couldn't speak loudly in the presence of a white woman. Black men couldn't be in the singular presence of a white woman, meaning even when Dick Rowland got on this elevator, he was violating, in essence, the laws of America, being a Black man in a private space with a white woman. Y'all get where I'm coming from? That no matter if he'd have walked out of there with white gloves on, he was still going to be implicated in something because the context had already been created of this jealousy. And that's what I'm going to call it, by these whites who lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma, at the prosperity of these African Americans in Greenwood. And it was just a matter of something had to happen. And everybody knew it. You guys may, there's another piece of context you have to have here. It's called the Red Summer. So we're talking about May of 1921, but you have to go back to May of 1919. Whereas this thing called right. Red Summer, where all throughout America, Chicago, Detroit, Washington, D.C., and this heinous massacre that happens in a place called Elaine, Arkansas. It is all this period of what we call the Red Summer, where whites were reacting to African Americans moving up. You get me? And it was happening all over America. So that's the context of what we got here. So now Tulsa is just going to act on what has been acted on in Elaine, Arkansas, and Washington, D.C., and Chicago. They used to call it the Chicago race riot. Now they call it what it is, Chicago Massacre, right? Where just for swimming across an imaginary line in Lake Michigan, they then ransack and destroy, the South Side of Chicago. So this is Tulsa acting out an American ethos at the time. It's very easy to kind of say Tulsa and Oklahoma and try to put that, but you got to put it in this context. So Dick Rowland braces, does something, touches this woman. The next person says that he has violated her. Remember the context of right womanhood. And now we're going to arrest him, and whites are going to come down there because already built up. They've been talking about this stuff. They've been jealous of Black people for all this time. I'm just telling it like it is. And now you got this situation. And the nation has said that these types of situations are the pretext for mass racial violence, the supposition of the violation of white womanhood. And then it happens. And then it happens. And they begin to go throughout the city and burn 35 blocks. Do you hear me? 35 blocks of Greenwood. If you look at pictures, someone's on listening, just Google. It looks like a bomb hit it.
It looks like a war zone.
Exactly. It looks like a scene from World War I. And many people said that they saw a plane flying over that bombed folk. All right. Mm-hmm. So then they do it. They achieved their objective. In 48 hours, they destroyed what Black people had built. And I'm not going to say in the last 20 years, I'm saying what Black people had built since they had been here since 1619, because this was a culmination, Greenwood, of the struggles of Black people from the time period of slavery to try to get to a space of respectability in America and to have their own. to, in essence, achieve the American dream. And in 48 hours, over 300 people, at last count, over 300 people killed. There's also an excavation going on as we speak to try to uncover these mass graves, because many people say that even more, 5,000 Black people are pushed out of the city. The Klan literally has lined up along the major streets, Klan members, and if you Google, it'll say escorting the Negro out of Tulsa. You know, this is comprehensive. This is not one or two mad white people. This is a systematic action visited upon an entire community with not only the okay, but the deputization of over 300 white men by the sheriff so that they now have legal jurisdiction to destroy that which Black people have created. I'm gonna stop right there and we can go, but that's the concept.
You know, and I got a question for you there, Dr. Walker. I really, you touched on something at the beginning that I actually just, in my last minute, research for today's show, I hadn't really thought about this, and they don't really teach us this much in school, and that is the relationship with the indigenous people and the African Americans here. And in actuality, the indigenous people of the area were slaveholders as a result of them making deals with, I guess, because the French Indian War, okay, the French and the Indians stood up against the British. And as a part of the treaty, they were trading in rum and African slaves. And I was like, dang, I didn't know that. And this is how they're saying the numbers like 3,600 Black people got into that general area of Tulsa, Oklahoma. That's really, really important, relation right there. And then they just, they grow and they prosper and everything. But my question to you, sir, is now, okay, we got all the stuff that's happened. It always comes down to somebody messing around with the white woman, Emmett Till, the whole thing, But why the secrecy on both sides? How does that happen for so many years, where so many people, even in today, are saying, "I never heard of this"?
Well, I think it's twofold. For African Americans, for many of them, one, we weren't taught it, anywhere. And part of the non-teaching is, one, we didn't create the textbooks at that time, but also, you got to remember, for many of us, the reality, the trauma, you get me? The trauma of what happened. People are still dealing with the trauma generationally of what happened. I mean, entire families, over 1,300 Black people lost their homes during that time period. And so there's a generation of people in Tulsa who literally talked about it, but didn't talk about it. And what I mean by that is talk about it in closed spaces, talk about it in communities where we can, but not the larger narrative. So that thing became literally kind of isolated to a reality that people talked about in Oklahoma, other than African Americans talking about Black Wall Street. And it was this concept that you always hear Black people talking about, but many people didn't know what it was. They didn't know if that meant it was in New York or I remember growing up and being in college, and people always say they destroyed Black Wall Street. I didn't know it was Oklahoma. I just knew there was this notion of this thing called Black Wall Street that was destroyed at a certain time. It was just that context. It was nebulous. Like, I got the name, but I don't get what it is. I didn't know it was the Tulsa Race Massacre. Now, for whites, think about this. The government was complicit in the destruction of Greenwood. It was complicit. It deputized over 300 people and gave them the legal right to go in and destroy the community. So there is going to be an issue of culpability that the government is going to try to make sure that it covers up as we're moving forward. You may know. So I just to give you a little context. So I used to work at a project in this place called Southern Nazarene University, which is in Bethany, Oklahoma, which is literally right next to Oklahoma City. Now, if you know, prior to 9/11, when anybody talked about what was the greatest terrorist attack in American history, they would talk about the bombing of the Mora Federal Office Building in Oklahoma City. Now, mind you, Oklahoma City and Tulsa ain't that far away from each other. And to be in that same state, you get where I'm coming from? And people saying, what is the greatest terrorist action? That means that nobody is teaching this in Oklahoma, even though it was Oklahoma history, right? Because there's no, I've been to the memorial in Oklahoma City at the Federal Office Building, and it is an amazing tribute to the people who died there and the negative nature of white terrorists in America, domestic terrorists, Timothy McVeigh and his cohorts, of what they did. But the fact that not even an hour and a half drive away in Tulsa, there is this situation that happened and people don't talk about it, has to do with a cover up that is conscious. You know, this is not just, it's not conscious. It's deliberate to not talk about it, because that means you're complicit. And that means that you are feeding into this narrative for America that they don't want to deal with, which is your treatment of Black people and what you've done. That is not just Black people don't work hard enough. It's not just Black people are lazy. It's not just, you know, all these other misnomers or things that we say, when in reality, you see this here: hard work, industrial, industry, everything else. And then it's destroyed. So what do you got to do? You got to cover that up, because it doesn't fit your narrative of Black people taking care of business. I mean, your narrative of Black people somehow being victims or whatever else, because Black people were taking care of their business. So you got to take both those: trauma on behalf of Black people, a specific government cover up to cover up their liability legally, and then the issue of literally just whitewashing and downplaying anything. And then the question that I said in the beginning: language. We call these things race riots up until about 15 years ago, which makes people believe that there's some sort of mutuality going on of kind of anarchy, right? Versus directed action towards the hunting down and killing of Black people. You know what I mean? And that's what happened in New Orleans, Louisiana in 1837, where they literally ran 1/3 of all the Creoles out and they ended up being in Lafayette, Louisiana. That's what happens in Memphis, Tennessee in 1866, when they're fearful that after the Civil War, African Americans will align with the Republican Party and have power over whites. That's what happens again in New Orleans in 1866, when they call it the New Orleans race riot, when it was really a race massacre. And then you can just go down the line, as I told you, Elaine, Rosewood, you just go over and over and over again. And it's an attempt to not talk about the heinous things that have been done systematically to Black people. So I'm just.
Dr. Walker, you are so right. Oh my goodness, I'm sitting here just really taking in everything that you're saying, and I know from experience the trauma. I mean, you think about it. I mean, what the banks did, you know, after they burned down this whole town of Greenwood, people lost their bank books, so they couldn't go to the bank and get their money. Insurance companies would not honor the policies because they called it a riot, because the insurance policies didn't cover riots. Riot means that there was both sides involved, not whereas a massacre is you're attacking me, you know. And so the insurance companies, who are, many of which are still around today, did not and have not honored any of those policies. You're talking about American companies, or airplane companies who lended planes to this. It was communal. It was a whole. I mean, it was an orchestrated plan of destruction, a massacre towards a people who were just trying to find their place in this country and have a great life experience, like this American dream that everyone's been told about. That's all they were trying to do. I mean, when I read the history, and I thought, oh my God, corporations provided planes so that they could fly across Greenwood and drop bombs on innocent people. Think about that. I mean, that's just really something. And then also too, with regards to, and it's enough for them to be shamed about it and not want to talk about it. And like you said, the liability, you know, of apologizing for, which we'll talk about, because there's still a fight for that. But, you know, I think about me, and I think about my community that I come up in terms of dealing with that pain and not wanting to talk about it. I will say that the Tulsa story was around my upbringing, but we were in so much pain that we didn't want to talk about it. We had so much that we were already dealing with. And I'll give you an example. You know, the Wilson family, Charlie Wilson and his brothers, they were part of my church family. And I remember their father, Elder Wilson, they're proud to be Tulsans, proud to come from Tulsa. And I remember whenever he would get in the pulpit, he proudly talked about how he was from Tulsa. And he would try to tell us about this story. But in the Black church, you know, we heard it and we didn't hear it, right? And now that all of this is happening and we're experiencing the 100-year reflection as we look back on a continuous struggle, it caused me to really examine and say, okay, what was Elder Wilson really trying to tell us back then? Because, and for African Americans, we are probably in a better space now, seeing that a little distance from so much of the pain that we have to endure, you know, is not as prevalent. Jim Crow and all of that stuff and everything, we're a little bit further away from that. And so now we have, and then there's a new generation, you know, who's able to hear the history and see what was going on. I'm too am now looking back and saying, what was Elder Wilson trying to tell us about? You know, I mean, their family, Gap Band, you know, and they told us back then, Gap Band means Greenwood, Orchard, and Pine. And they would tell us the story of why that was important. But the music industry, of course, didn't want to hear the acronyms of Gap Band and what was the history behind it. The world just wasn't ready, and we weren't ready as well, because we were dealing with our own struggles and our own pains. But I'm looking at today, and now we're ready, you know, and so it's really interesting to see what's going on. And when you think, I mean, Google, you can look at all the history, and it's just unbelievable. I mean, the thing that really got me is, oh my God, how do you get together and get planes and drop bombs on people? What kind of soul is that? I'm just going to tell you what I'm thinking. What kind of soul does that? You know, so it's a whole lot, and you know, to talk about that is still happening and everything. And I'm just really glad that we've had the chance to talk about it. What I want to do is I like to move us into, I guess, what happened since then, just the fight to try to recover from it, the fight to try to restore, you know, what was all lost and everything. If you could share with us just like what's happening from the 1920, I know around 1925 they began to be able to build a little bit, but nothing like what they had before. But you know what was happening in the 30s and in the 40s, and you're talking about 100 years, you know, and we still have survivors who were just in Congress before Congress finally on May 19th to talk about what happened. But you're talking 100. What has happened in this 100-year fight to try to redeem from that experience?
Well, first off, you know, it's really interesting, and thank you so much for that, Rhonda, the lead in when I didn't know that about the Gap Band. So, you know what I mean? It's so crazy when you talk about how you begin to learn, and sometimes things are, like you said, they're in front of you, but you don't see them, right? Because you don't know the other context. You can't put the pieces together, right? So Greenwood, Orchard, and Pine, I'm like, oh, wow, you know? And I'm telling you, Rhonda, even when you talked about you dropped a bomb on me, I mean, when you said somebody dropping a bomb and I thought about the Gap Band song, you dropped a bomb on me. I don't know if there's any connection, but that just, you know, that's a whole nother thing right there. But so there's this great documentary, I think it's called Return to T-Town. I think it's what it's called. But it's about the community of Greenwood in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And it talks about the race massacre, and then it talks about a rebuilding of the community. And that by the middle of the 1950s and 1960s, Greenwood, Orchard, and Pine, I mean, the streets, whatever, they had rebuilt. They had literally rebuilt. And it's a beautiful documentary because it interviews people who were born, and people whose families were there, and they had rebuilt. And then the community suffered again. And that was through the process of urban renewal. So you know that the United States government, especially in the 1950s and 1960s, started this whole issue of urban renewal and this notion of even the National Highway Act, where the notion of creating interstates and freeways and whatever else. But many times those intersections, or excuse me, interstates and freeways and highways and supposed, you know, uplifting of communities meant that they were destroying Black communities by driving or literally creating a freeway or a thoroughfare right through the middle of the Black community. And that happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma, just like it happened in Liberty City in Miami, just like it happened in what's called Black Bottom in Detroit, Michigan, just like it happened over and over and over and over again. So this notion of through eminent domain, taking all the property again, and then bisecting the community with an interstate, which then destroys culture and all the rest. And they did it in New Orleans, in Detroit, in Tulsa. The thoroughfare that's built, the freeway, the highway, is directly down the main street, the most important street for African Americans. You know, it's almost like, you know, well, we can go to it about Crenshaw and you know what I mean? But it's literally so that they would destroy all of the businesses, take them out. So after they had rebuilt, they were destroyed again through federal public policy of creating these freeways that run through Tulsa. And they made the decision to run it directly on top of the major street of the African-American community, bisecting the community, destroying the Black businesses and all that stuff again. And once again, this is a practice that's happened in so many cities. So Tulsa built itself back up again and then had itself destroyed again. Yeah, you go ahead.
It's interesting you mentioned about the freeways, because we can talk to people right here in our region that can remember back in the day when the 105 was getting built. They got their homes displaced down there in San Diego. You and I know San Diego. The 805, the people were getting displaced. There's folks in Compton that talk about. I think it's a part of the 710 that, or at least the 91, where they can remember getting displaced from the freeways, getting eminent domain being imposed on them.
Yeah, and that's what Dr. Daniel mentioning when he mentioned, imagine a freeway going through Crenshaw. I had a flash. I was like, oh my God, I can't. That would be devastating. I can't even imagine, because you know what? That's our community. That's a part of a staple of who we are. It's part of our heritage, our culture. I couldn't even imagine them just running. I mean, when you said, I was like, oh my God, that is. I felt the devastation just of the thought of what that might be like. And they experienced it. They went through it. And that's really something,
Yeah. Now, if you go there today, I try to visit Tulsa about once or twice a year. One of the interesting things is there's now this place called the Reconciliation Park. So one of the outgrowths of the Tulsa Race Massacre is an individual named John Hope Franklin. So I'm a historian. There's almost no bigger name for historians, not just Black historians. He was the head of the American Historical Association. He's wrote the textbook that most of us use in African American studies, From Slavery to Freedom. He's from Tulsa, and he grew up in the middle of the race massacre. And then he chose to use his life, to use history and culture, and to talk about ways we can bring people together. So they have this thing called the John Hope Franklin Reconciliation Park, and it tells the story of Black people, the native population. It tells a real story about the Tulsa Race Massacre. It doesn't sugarcoat it or anything. Then they've got an interpretive center and other things there, to where now they're attempting, they've made a real effort to try to name it, talk about what really happened. It's a beautiful park. It has, it lists names of people who died. It's something. But if you guys remember, most of us, I won't say most of us, but I would say a lot of people didn't get a sense even about Tulsa until last year, when the former president of the United States of America chose to try to launch his new campaign, which was rife with race politics, in Tulsa, right on the anniversary of Juneteenth.
Right. Yes.
Which was like, what? And it was a part of this process of people then saying, what is Tulsa? What's going on? And so in a backhanded way, I want to give Donald J. Trump a whole bunch of credit for bringing to the national consciousness the issue of Tulsa, because once he put that thing there, then everybody started talking. Then all of a sudden people were asking questions. What is this? What is this? More people talk about Juneteenth. I hate to say it, because it was an affront to our humanity for him to launch a racially divisive campaign on the anniversary that we celebrate the ending of the period of enslavement of Black people in America, in a place where hundreds of Black people died at the hands of folk who that language about racial division. So that's kind of, you go from there, you build back up, you have the urban renewal stuff, you build back up, and then you get this Reconciliation Park, and then you get this flashpoint moment in history. And I always do this. I got to thank the young people, because y'all remember what happened. The young people using social media to flip the script on that whole thing. Yeah. But it was them saying no, right? Young people were saying, I want to know about Tulsa. I want to know about Juneteenth, and you're not going to do this in that place. And so it was beautiful that these young people decided that I want to know more. And the other key, Rhonda, I think, is this notion of naming. When you said before about Elder Wilson, and sometimes it's hard for us to name it because it hurts, to say it. So we come up with other words, you know what I mean? And we come up with other ways, and we come up with other things, because the pain of saying it is so great. When we're already dealing with, You know, if it's the 60s, we're dealing with the civil rights movement and the death of Medgar Evers and the struggles of Daisy Bates and Fannie Lou Hamer and all the rest of it. And if it's the 80s, then we're dealing with, you know, these Abner Louima kind of things and Michael, you know, and then it's the 2000. But in this era right now, I think it's Ahmaud Arbery and Sandra Bland and Breonna Taylor and everything else made these young people say, I want to know it and speak it. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going with no kindas around it. And then they took an assault on the way in which we've told history. And that whole issue of pulling down Confederate monuments, that whole issue of pushing to change names was not just about taking away certain names, but it was also about uplifting other things. And one of the things the young people uplifted was Tulsa and Juneteenth. And I got to give them much of that because that is a huge part of people even having it in their consciousness.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. They say their name. That's what they say.
Yes.
All that, say their name, you know. Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Let me ask you a little bit. I was thinking about the pain here as you all were talking there, and you know, the silence of this history, how they've managed to keep it so undercover for several generations. And Rhonda was telling me something today that I really was been turned over my mind. I couldn't believe it. So the present mayor is saying he had not heard of this until recently. How the heck is that?
Especially on top of his history.
Right. So here he is. He's, you know, several generations in, living in Tulsa. If he's leading, he's been there for a minute. Somebody's talking about this, even if it's whispers. That man has to know about it, is what I think. How can they not know about it?
I'm with you, Greg. I think that I think that some people, I mean, you can't, how like I said, there's an entire, you know, regional park in your city called the John Hope Franklin Reconciliation Park, and you don't know about it. You know the city is the one who administers parks and recreation and all that stuff. If you don't know about that, this is a major city park and you don't even know why it's there. You might not need to be the mayor because. So that's why I say I think people are just trying to come up with an excuse for their non-action. And their easiest way to talk about their non-action is to say, I did not know. I know there's people who don't know, but you can't be the mayor of a city and you got this huge thing in the middle of your city right across the street from Black College. You cannot tell me that you don't know what's going on. You just
and Dr. Downey, not only are you the mayor, but you are a fourth generation mayor. Your grandfather was the mayor, your uncle was the mayor, and your great grandfather was the mayor in 1899 and 1900. So how do you not know that? I think probably the reckoning with this has come up on your clock. You're watching your time. And so, of course, you don't want to own that you are well aware of this history. You know, sometimes the truth is there. The truth is unsaid. You don't have to say the truth. You just see it, follow the dots, and it'll lead to the truth, whether people say it or not. But we were watching a piece as we were researching for this, and we looked at a clip on YouTube where he said he didn't know, and that his family had kept this from him, and so he's learning about all of this. Yeah. Right. I don't need to say anything else.
I'm just like, even if once again, your family cannot tell you nothing. You're the mayor of the city. Well, that's what I say, Rhonda. I think it's an excuse to then talk. That's how you try to, you figure like, what's the worst case? You know what I mean? You could either say you knew and haven't done anything, or you can just say you don't and then claim ignorance and let people just call you a fool. So you make a choice of which one you want to be. And I think in this case, the person has chosen to be like, well, you can fault me for not knowing versus you faulting me for not doing. And so I think they're hoping that people will just, you know, I mean, this it doesn't make any sense, right? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. All right. It just doesn't make any sense. Even after last year's stuff, right? Right. I mean, you got your whole city is the center of a national and international dialogue. You don't know.
Right.
It's crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm sorry, Greg, go ahead.
Okay, so I was just gonna go and I wanted to ask, you know, the last building standing after the destruction is the Vernon Street AME Church. You know, you and I always talk about, you know, the resilience and the place of the Black church in the movement. You know, what history right there is that the church was, you know, it was destroyed partially, but they rebuilt it and all of that. Let's talk about what do we think the symbol of that church is now in the community, knowing this history. As if you and me right now walk by Vernon AME, we be feeling like, oh shoot, they survived.
I think that's it. That we're survivors. You know, that think about all that we have been through in this country, right? I mean, you know, and we're still here. You know, and we're still here and we're vibrant. You know what I mean? And we're innovating and we're aspirational still. And we still give to the world. And we have, man, a sense of reconciliation, redemption, and forgiveness that the rest of the world, I guarantee you, marvels at, given all that we've been through. And that we've not turned into a bunch of people who are seeking to return the same hate that we've received, you know? And so it is about resilience. It's about we're still here. It's about we're survivors. It's about you kick us and we, boom, come back. And that issue of the church, and specifically the AME Church, African Methodist Episcopal Church, the first African-American standalone religious denomination here in America, the fact that that was still standing, which was the symbol of the AME Church was an anvil, you know what I'm saying? Right. And this notion of something that's solid and foundational and that you build with, oh yeah, there's a whole lot going on right there. I don't even want to get it. I might start looking for some amens up in here. So right, but we survive, you know. Yeah. That's what we do.
Yeah. Dr. Daniel, when you look at the past, which I don't like using the word past because past means that it's something that's behind us and we're actually still living all of this stuff. So it's not really the past, but it's just things that have happened in our history. Do you see? What do you see? Do you see any resemblance or anything today that resembles what we have been going through? And what's the application from our history that we can use for today? Are we still in a fight? What does that fight look like today?
Rhonda up here throwing me softballs, Greg. She throwing me softballs. Like, do you see anything today that might be close to boom? Right?
I know you're gonna knock it out the park. Boom!
Come on.
I know how you gonna what do you think, Dr. Daniel? What do you think? Do you see anything? I mean, what do you see? Yes, I see it.
Come on.
I know you're gonna knock it out the park. That's why.
Listen, that violent and vehement language and action of a specific group of people in America today who are organizing, buying guns, on all kinds of clandestine little social media sites that we don't, because certain people aren't on Twitter or Facebook anymore, if you get where I'm coming from. There's all these other little worlds. We have infinitely more need and desire to do surveillance of these undercover kind of, I don't like to use the word white supremacists because that assumes that somebody is acting like they actually are supreme. I would say, negative white thinking. You know what I mean? These people are around and they are organized and they are paramilitary. They have infiltrated law enforcement. They have infiltrated the military. And their rhetoric and their actions, because not just their rhetoric, it's their actions. No greater way than the assault on the Capitol, not a riot at the Capitol, an assault to try to overturn the country and to reframe the Constitution by not allowing the constitutional protections of the change of power to happen, right? And so you got all that and you let it happen. And you don't say nothing, you know, and that just emboldens these people. And then you have an attempt to try to have a commission just to look into it, and then you got a whole bunch of people call themselves patriots and Americans, and then they vote to not even, some of them vote not to even have a commission to look at what we all saw with our naked eye. So when we talk about this and we talk about allowing for that spirit to fester unchecked, and then you continue with the demonization of Black people and Black bodies, which is what was going on in 1921. And then all you need is I'm not negative, I'm not a doomsayer, I'm not a whatever else, but I'm just saying it's about remaining diligent and vigilant to make sure that we root out these things. And that's why I think the discussion that we're having now about things like Juneteenth, the discussion that we're having now about systemic racism and about literally looking at and trying to dismantle many of the structures and foundations in this country that have been built on racist actions and practices. 50% of all police forces in America were created out of slave patrols. The ones in the South went from literally being slave patrollers, or the patrollers of Black people who were enslaved by racist individuals, into the police department. And the ethos comes with them and has never been pulled out of those institutions. So we have to be about that all the way through. There has to be accountability. When people do things that are against the interest of humanity and freedom, I'm gonna put it that way. We don't even, I want to take it beyond even Black people, the interest of humanity and freedom. There has to be consequences for those people who cross that bridge where America, we're supposed to stand for freedom, to deny freedom to others. We're supposed to fight for the world, for humanity of others and the protection of human life. So when that happens in our own space, we need to be the ones who speak up against that and root it out and have consequences for those who do those things. So when we're talking about what we can be doing, we need to be like, I always tell my students and everything else, if anybody's watching, they like, Dr. Walker going with this thing again. I always say this, that Black people never get credit. Black people and women, people of color, never get credit for 4 things: seeing the problem, developing a strategy to address the problem, carrying out the strategy, and then being successful. We all act as if it just happens. Rosa Parks just was on the bus and her feet hurt, right? And not that she's a community organizer and activist working on a plan, and then that all these Black people stick with the plan for 11 months and then win. You know what I mean? So when we're talking about these things, about being able to conceptualize and see what the issue is, we know what it is. It's systemic racism. It's its vestiges that still are visited upon us in all kinds of institutional frameworks. It's then rooting that out, and we have great scholars who've talked about critical race theory, 1619 Project, other things like that, about delving deep into the nodules of the stuff, you know what I mean? And then asking to birth something different and new, So I always tell that Black people are always, direct. We have to be directed. So boom, we have to say what it is. Number 2, we have to be innovative, because times change. And I can look at Martin Luther King and love everything that Martin Luther King does, but I can't do it the exact same way Martin Luther King did it, because this is a different world, different thing. And we have to innovate on top of that, right? And then the last is continually be aspirational, that we got to continually be like, we're doing this not because we want to go back and be like you. We're doing this because we want to be better. And I don't mean better in the negative, like I'm good and you're good, but I mean better for humanity, that we want to make the world a better place. We want to make America a better place. We want to make California. We want to make Los Angeles. We want to make our neighborhoods better places. So we are directed. We name it to what it exactly is. We got to be innovative, because you can't assume that what you did 30 years ago is going to work today. And that's why them kids did that thing in Tulsa and worked it out, because they were being innovative, right? And then number 3, you got to be aspirational. We cannot be about doing to them what they've done to us. That is not where we get to, because our humanity is greater than that. You know what I mean? I don't owe my humanity to this current state that I live in. I owe my humanity to the universe and to the Creator. And so I have to always be aspirational to go to what I believe the Creator would want us to be. And that would be to live in harmony. And that only happens when you root out this other stuff. So.
Yeah, I agree. Dr. Daniel, I'm going to tell you something, man. I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, yes, we are in such a time of inflection right now as a community, right? We're getting all of this information. We're seeing right before our very eyes all of the systemic racism, all of these ills. Now we're reminded of way back in 1921, 100 years ago, this tremendous devastation. But there have been some in the community who have felt they've arrived, they've acclimated, they can move among the among white folks, and now all of us, they've actually forgotten where they've come from, or our history, and now there's this tremendous wake-up call. They're being jerked out of sleep and saying, okay, hey, look, we still have this history and we have to be, as you say, aspirational in our next moves as a people. What do you say to those who may be resistant, or what would you say to even your white colleagues who say, hey, you know what, you need to forget about it? That was the past, man.
I could forget about it if you stop reminding me about it. You know what I'm saying? And when I say, because I keep getting reminded, right? Ahmaud Arbery, I get reminded of lynchings. You know what I mean? Sandra Bland, I get reminded of lynchings. You know what I mean? Breonna Taylor, I get reminded of police officers jumping in and killing Fred Hampton. I get reminded of, you see what I'm saying? So I can forget history when you stop acting like you in history. You know what I mean? When I would love to forget about history if I wasn't living in so many of the things in it on a daily basis. So for those who say, don't worry, it's the past, institutions that were put together still affect us today. Just real quick. So we were enslaved till 1865, right? And then they created another system called Jim Crow, which existed up until the early 1970s. You guys, we're all in the same generation. We know we always, the first black this, 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 the first black this. That's how I grew up. Every time you're talking the first black, the first black, the first black stuff. Yeah. So you can't tell me that those things don't affect today when you've never addressed or tried to change them. That issue of urban renewal that I talked about, nobody's going to try to rebuild these cities or take that freeway away or give reparations to the folk who lost their stuff and try to allow for them to rebuild again. Nobody did that kind of stuff. So people are still suffering from those practices. There's a great documentary you got to watch. It's called Cooked. It's called Cooked. And it's on PBS right now. And you got to watch it. It's about this heat wave that happened about 15 years ago in Chicago. I totally didn't know nothing about it. This is what I'm talking about, where you're just like, what? It was like the same year as like 9/11 or something like that. And it was like this heat wave. And there were masses of black people who died during this heat wave because they didn't have proper ventilation, air conditioning, all the rest of the stuff. They were literally bringing semi trucks up and with refrigerator cars to serve as, Now, once again, I didn't know about this until I watched this documentary about 6 months ago. And then they break down what's going on in the South Side of Chicago. And they talk about, one, the urban renewal. Then number two, they start talking about the fact that the banks created not just redlining. All right, they had redlined the community, meaning for people who are watching, what redlining means, the banks would draw a line around a community and say, we're not going to give loans there. So when you look at these communities that why are their house like that? Because they can't refinance and pull money out to do the home improvements that you do. That's why your house stays looking well, because you keep pulling money out because the house is an asset. Right? But if you take that ability away from it, then what does that mean? That means that the only way you get loans is from your friends, from check cashing places. You get all this other kind of stuff, right? So they talk about this building up of this redlining. And then so these people who buy houses were buying them on these payments to the individual, not to a bank. And they would do this like you would pay, let's say if it's a $40,000 house, just a quick number, and you would pay $39,000 onto the house and you missed one payment. The person could now take your house back because it's theirs. There's no real paperwork other than this. It's almost like rent to own. And so you've given them money up until this point. Now they take the house back. Now they've gotten all your money and your improvements on the house. And now they rent it back out, or sell it, quote unquote, with these contract housing. They sell it back to another person now at the appreciated value, $100,000. And they're going to have that person buy and pay all the way up into a certain point and then get it back. So I keep the asset, you keep improving my asset, and meaning the person who owns the building, and you keep improving the asset, and all I do is just recycle it back and forth. Sooner or later, somebody's going to say, I ain't putting no more money back into this house, was not mine. I'm not going to put any more back in. Say what?
It's called Cook. The documentary is called Cook.
Yes. And where do we see it?
It's on PBS. If you just put Cook heat wave, it'll come up. And it's amazing. And then here's the trickiest part about it. Because of all that had happened in 9/11, the response to Chicago to all these people dying was to develop this really intense emergency preparedness system.
Wow.
And pour billions of dollars into this emergency preparedness system, which they've never used, instead of pouring billions of dollars into the rebuilding of the South Side of Chicago. And so it shows you that the money comes in and it goes all to, I mean, they're buying all kinds of special planes and boats that do things if there's ever I'm serious, you got what? It's this infrastructure that's crazy. And they're like, if they had taken that same money, they could rebuild every single house in the south side of Chicago and give people a certain amount of equity. But what's happening is all that money is going towards this preparedness. Get this, for an earthquake in Chicago. That's what the preparedness is about. An earthquake in Chicago. When was the last time in Chicago? I mean, it's all about for an earthquake that may come in Chicago, because we have to be prepared for the earthquake in Chicago versus the human crisis that's going on with regard to housing insecurity, food insecurity, educational inequality. Everything else is going on the south side of Chicago. And instead of investing in that, investing in this other subterfuge that gets you away from the real issue, which was the systemic poverty. And I say systemic because that redlining, that urban renewal, that denial of being able to buy a house, that's when I'm talking about systems. And that's why we have to attack systems. And we have to understand that systems were put in place in the past. That's the past. But why does somebody believe that if I'm a racist, and I'm not saying all whites are racist at all, I got a lot of white friends, those kind of numbers. No, but I'm not saying that. But if I acknowledge that there was racism and there were racist people who were elected to political office, why can't I then acknowledge that those people would have taken those actions and made policies based on those actions? If the government is making a law that says you don't have to provide for people of color the same that you do to whites, why wouldn't you think that that same government or people in Congress wouldn't say, send a freeway right through that community?
That's an interesting point, because when we had the Honorable Mayor Omar Bradley was talking about politicians are thinking 25 years ahead. That's like when you're sitting in their seat, they're thinking a whole generation ahead, and they're planning and they're plotting. And so, these racist politicians, as you say, they're driving those systems, thinking ahead of how it's going to affect, the general population. That's wow.
Yeah, so you got all these people elected.
We have to do the work today to affect tomorrow. So
that's why we have to understand past, because we have to understand how those things are put together so we can dismantle them. And we got to understand and be aspirational, because we got to put something else in its place that's not just a Band-Aid on the old thing. It's not just a new program from the Securities and Exchange Commission that allows for blacks to do X or Y. It's about changing the whole issue of how capital has been allocated, and to provide that capital access to communities of color so that we can rebuild our stuff ourselves with the same tools, financial tools, credit, capital, that other people have, right? But when you systemically don't give somebody the same tools and then ask for them to come up with the same product, it's just hard. You give me a hammer and some nails, you give this other person a power saw, you know what I mean? All the rest of this stuff, and I got a hammer and nails, and you want me to make mine look like yours. It's not victimization or anything like that. It is just truth. That's why I say we have to name it. We have to be talking about what we're talking about, not the other thing, not three different things. We need to be talking about what we're talking about so that we can make sure that we pinpoint it and then deal with it. And it, in this case, in many cases with our communities, has been access to capital, economic development. You guys know, you guys have been working around these issues for years, right?
Yeah.
And, that's why, I'm gonna leave you alone. I'm gonna leave it.
You know what? I guess to sum it up, we're dealing with a fixed fight, and the fight is fixed, like you said. And you give me a hammer and nails, and someone else has a power saw, So I'm also feeling a continued conversation here. I mean, it's so much to cover and talk about, and this information is so important for communities all over. So I'm feeling a continued conversation with you, Dr. Daniel, on this for sure. But in our closing, I want to say, currently right now, and you mentioned acknowledgement. I thought, oh yes, for sure, we want to speak on that. So right now, there is literally a fight, a forced fight for Tulsa Greenwood to be acknowledged. It's a forced fight to the point where, we just had the three survivors, Mother Randall, Mother Fletcher, and Uncle Ellis, and Congress up here before Congress on May 19th of this month, May 31st, this month. There is such a fight for it to be acknowledged, even to the point of digging up a mass grave site that was just found, that had 12 wooden coffins in there from victims of what happened with this massacre. And it is, thank you for clarifying it. It absolutely was a massacre. And I will repeat, you guys, a riot is when there's two sides. A massacre is when it's one side. And so I'm happy to hear it be called a massacre. And I can only imagine that if we should ever get it acknowledged as a massacre, that changes a whole lot with regards to the insurance companies and everyone else that that were perpetrated this horrible traumatic attack on this group of people, and really causing them to lose on substantial generational wealth. They're still their kids, and they're still feeling the effects of that. And many of them died brokenhearted without being acknowledged for the suffering. And I think about that as well. But Dr. Daniel, I wanted to ask you, with regards to the fight now, this fight is still happening, and it's one of many fights and everything. How do I'm going to try to sweeten up the clothes if I could, because it's just so much. But what's our takeaways from today's conversation? If I'm sitting here and I'm listening to this and I'm wanting to know, what can I do? How do we help bring more compassion to the world, to listeners and viewers? How do we be vessels of empathy, helping people to have more empathy? Because that's a big problem, because when people are less likely to help when they can't feel it and when they don't have compassion. How do we help in that area? And then what can we do to just make life better all over for everyone? Because some of us, everybody plays a side. I don't care who you are. Either you're the victim and it's happening to you. Either you're the perpetrator who is victimizing and doing this, causing suffering to people with your heart and your ways and the moves that you make in the economic system, your infrastructures, and just you're impacting people's quality of life. Or you may not be on either side, but you're still a part of it because you're sitting in the middle and doing nothing. What can we say to people like that who may be watching, or someone who may be watching this that knows someone like that can share this in a great situation of compassion and empathy where it could be received?
So it's just going to be very quick because I stick with this all the way through. It's about three things: about mind, body, and spirit. And mind, it means you got to increase your historical knowledge. Everybody has to read more, has to learn more, has to be an active learner in their own liberation. I mean, if you're white and you're like, some of these things are new and I didn't know about them, read more, read more, read more. If you're African American and you just found out about these things, read more, watch documentaries, find out more, expose yourself, travel and see. But you have to increase your background contextual knowledge. Number two, I said mind, body, and spirit. Body for me is about action. You can't read all day. Okay? I know people got thousands of books. They always asking me, what book should I read? What book should I read? I gave you 1,000 titles. Now do something. All right. So the second part is you have to act on what you know. As you said before, there's people who are perpetrating, there's people who are victims, and then there's people who are sitting in the middle not doing nothing, who basically are then assisting the perpetrator because you're not standing to stop anything. So the second part is jumping in. And jumping in means speaking up in your business meeting at your job. That means not just attending a rally or becoming part of an organization or providing money or whatever, but it means jump in. And then spirit, you got to have faith. And I say that because some people's hearts are not going to change by, I don't care how many stats you give them. I don't care how much you try to get groups of people to work around. The only thing that's going to happen for them is that a movement of God or the universe or something like that is going to happen, and they're going to have some sort of epiphany. And you got to have that faith to believe that it can happen, because it does happen. And so you just got to keep moving in terms of that faith, because you have to be sustained as we keep moving forward. There are going to be days when you get knocked down, but you got to have faith that the brighter day is going to come. There's going to be days when you have losses and not victories in the struggle, and you got to keep pushing. I use the example all the time of Stacey Abrams. So she lost by .something% for the governorship, but she's been winning ever since then, right? I mean, she's taken that quote unquote loss, but use that as the foundation to build, right? And then her building off of that has been important for everything that's going on right now, Congress, whatever else. If Stacey Abrams had chosen to give up hope after she lost and was robbed of an electoral victory, if she had given up hope we would not have a majority in Congress right now. But she did not give up hope, and she kept moving and organizing and kept doing things. And in the end, her movement and organizing ends up benefiting the two senators, right? She's not the person, she's not the vice president of the United States, she's not the senator from the state of Georgia, but she might truly be the key to everything that did happen. You get me? And that's about having faith, continue to stay in the struggle, and you never know, you can pray. You remember we were watching and everybody's going, can Georgia turn? Can Georgia turn? Can Georgia turn? Can Georgia turn? And we were looking at those numbers, and we had to have what? Faith, right? And then all of a sudden, even if it was 10 or 30 or 80, it just had to be one more than the other, right? And then that was the key to so many other things. Warnock, Ossoff, all that kind of stuff. So mind, you got to increase your historical knowledge, learn some more, get some more stuff, get some more, there's new things going on, learn. Number two, you got to act. You can't read all day and sit in your house and read all day. You got to get out there and learn by experience. But sometimes you're going to make a mistake. You're just going to be in it. If you're non-Black and you want to be part of the struggle, it means that you just going to go in and say, give me some grace. I'm trying to somebody. You know what I mean? Don't, just go on in. And then lastly, you got to have hope and faith that it is going to change, because you can look at history, and though some of the things are still here, things do change. So that's.
And you guys, this is coming from a historian who has committed his life to keeping our history alive and to share the history with us who don't know, and to help us to be informed so that we can take those pieces and apply to our lives to make things happen. Dr. Daniel, thank you so much for being here with us today and taking time out on Memorial Day as we celebrate those who served. You were awesome today, and we cannot let you get out of here without telling us, what are you doing now? What's next? How do we follow you?
So all my stuff is drdanielwalker.com. So drdanielwalker.com is the website. drdanielwalker@gmail is the email. Dr. Daniel Walker, whatever is social media, all the rest of that kind of stuff. And I just got a lot of things going. I mean, right now it's about just building and moving forward. So for me, it's finishing this film about this amazing dancer, choreographer, leader named Dr. Danielle Scarborough, who Greg kind of knows about. That'll be out. It's called The Path. It'll be out in early 2022. It is about the continuation of the Long Beach Indie International Film and Entertainment Festival, which is going to be spring of 2022, which is showcasing diverse content and content creators and trying to make sure that we have a bridge between the academia and the industry, and then trying to create a bridge for young people in their careers into film, media, and art. So it's just moving forward, and a lot of the work we're doing in school districts right now across America. Lastly, just want to say this thing. So Greg, I don't know if you know, Rhonda, so I just became a board member of the California Endowment. So
wow.
Yeah. So yeah. So we should talk. We should make sure we talk. All right, we should make sure we talk. But the ability to be a part of this organization, for those of you guys who don't know, it's one of the largest private foundations in California. $300 million a year almost that go out, that are given out, granted to things, to entities doing good work. Our pieces are people power. Trying to make sure that we train the present generation of leaders, young people and old, or whatever else. Number two is changing the way that we look at institutions, specifically criminal justice and prisons, schools, and immigration. And then lastly, it's about healthcare, that your zip code should not determine your life expectancy. And so really getting into that piece about what I'm going to be doing around philanthropy is one of the biggest things for me. It's an honor to be a guy who grew up on a dirt road in Fontana, California, to from a mother who was on welfare, to be at that kind of a position to help those things happen. But that's going to be a real big push for me, is really working around the issue of philanthropy and trying to make sure that even not just the organization I'm affiliated with, but others begin to be more equitable in how they distribute the funds that they give, so that these communities can begin to continue to move forward. So.
Awesome. You guys heard that. Follow him at drdaniel.com. And I'll even go further on to say, this is one person that you want to add to your, you have some people that are just a part of your lifelong journey, that for your life and your time on this earth, this is one person, or one of the people that I follow. That Dr. Daniel is one of those people that you want to include in that portion of your life. You will not regret it. He keeps you informed. He keeps it real. So please definitely do that. Much love. I see where BG said that's what's up. Thank you, BG, for watching. I saw Sasha on there earlier today. She took time for her barbecue to watch today. So thank you so much for that. And then I see Anita Tucker. Thank you so much for taking time out today on this Memorial Day to be with us. And so with that, I'm going to let our amazing Greg J close out and share with us whatever he's got to say. And he is really good at telling you what we got going on. So Greg J, take it away.
Well, thank you there, Rhonda Love. The announcements for today. You know, look, we do this thing called Coffee Conversations with Greg J. I got a message actually, from a friend of mine who lives in the Congo, and so he says, "Hey, I'm back in LA." I was, "Oh, cool, man. Let's get together. Let's chop it up." He says, "Yeah, you need to know I escaped the volcano in the Congo," and I'm like, "What?" I go online and I see this huge news. The city is Goma, where my good friend lives. He's married over there. He does a lot of faith-based work over there. He's been over there for years, and he had to come back because the volcano began to erupt. 500,000 people have been evacuating that general area. Uganda and Rwanda are the neighboring countries. They're beginning to experience, pressure from the refugees coming away. But my friend Paul Turner will be here with us on tomorrow, 9 a.m. to talk about his experience in the escaping from the volcano, and then of course the work that he does, because he's itching to get back. He needs the volcano to be over so he get back in it, So that's that. Guess what? Juneteenth is coming up, y'all. Juneteenth is coming up, and DreamKreator Studio has got a full deck. First of all, starting at 11 a.m., we're working with the Black Arts LA. We're doing a virtual festival, Juneteenth, and so we are having panel discussions. I want to talk to you about that there, Dr. Daniel. We got a couple of really good. We got Dr. Anthony Samad coming through to chair our social justice panel. We have Dr. Teresa Price to chair our education panel. We have Karen A. Clark doing our financial literacy panel, virtual booths, all that kind of stuff, plus music performances, and that you can see that on all of our platforms and Facebook and all that there. And then in the evening, after you have gone to all of your Juneteenth celebrations on that day, I know folks are itching to get out. There's a lot of in-person experiences to go there, but when you get back home, get your beverage, kick back, turn on your digital device, and DreamKreator Studio has got the reflections of Juneteenth. And this one right here, let me tell you something. Rhonda has been in the research lab, turning up some stuff up. She said, "Hey, did you know?" And I'm like, "Well, dang, I did not know this information she's about to share with you." She's connected directly with the folks in Galveston, where Colonel Granger came with the order to let the folks know that they were finally free. She's hooked up with the Afro-Mexicanos. I'm not even going to tell you about that story. You need to tune in to hear about that one, because it is incredible. And people who I have shared this story with are like, "What? I didn't know that." I mean, it's really, really an incredible time to come and learn and reflect, and just get your mind on what the whole essence of Juneteenth is. It's more than red soda water and watermelon, I'll tell you that much right there. Right? So there we have it. DreamKreator Studio, we're doing big things. And thank you all for your support. All of our platforms. I'm not even going to go down the laundry list, all the stuff we have going on, but just to say thank you. And we're grateful. We are committed to building these bridges of music and culture. I think there, Miss Rhonda Love, and I'm really, really thankful to be alongside you in this journey as we help uplift, inspire, and inform the people.
Oh, that's right. It's all about telling our stories and building one another, right, Dr. Walker?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. That's what we all are doing, is just making sure that the history that we've experienced can be put in a way that it touches other people and changes some lives, even after we're long gone. I have loved ones who have spoke words into my life, and I'm still living on those words. even though they're not here in the tangible anymore. And so that's really what we're about. We're all about is just taking those stories and those experiences and those wisdoms so that we can put them in a way that the generations to come can learn from it, and that we can build as a community. Because at the end of the day, no matter what you look like, where you come from, we all want the same thing, and that is to have the best life experience that we can possibly have. And so that's what we're about. So we do this work with Dr. Daniel, with you. Greg J., I thank you so much. I mean, you are an incredible legacy in what you do. Could have gone anywhere, and you are here in Long Beach doing this work. And so I thank God for you as well. And let's continue to do this great work.
All right. I think our production manager, we give him a little credit there. We got a producer here. Poke your head in here. We got a producer here. He's
Hello, how y'all doing?
he's letting us know, he helped us put the show together and build out the studio, and we're thankful for him too, young Josiah boy.
Yes.
Uh-oh, you dropped out
gone.
there. Okay. All right, y'all. Thank you all so much. Remember, love one another. Love one another. Love one another. Peace and blessings.
Peace.